West Virginia, the only state in America carved out of another by popular vote. A land of misty Appalachian peaks, small towns, and a dramatic gorge created by one of the oldest rivers in the world. But it's also a state that's known great conflict. It was in West Virginia that a famous raid in the name of freedom brought the nation one step closer to civil war. And where battles of that war still fire up passions on its streets today. Here, ancient rainforests left behind deep veins of buried treasure that men and machines have been ripping from the earth for more than 150 years and are now causing entire mountaintops to simply disappear. And where one former miner struggles to save his family's land from the same fate. In West Virginia, 3 of America's great mountain ranges converge, and almost every valley holds a different surprise. From a legendary resort that hid a top government secret for decades, to a futuristic facility where astronomers are discovering how the universe may have been formed, to a place known as America's Taj Mahal. For the mountaineers that climb its famous peaks, to the rafters that ride the Big Five, this is almost heaven. West Virginia. In 1943, a group of officers from the U.S. Army's elite mountain training group in Colorado arrived here in West Virginia. They needed a place to train World War II soldiers for their upcoming deployment to the rugged mountains of northern Italy. They chose one of West Virginia's most iconic landscapes, a series of jagged peaks that towered 900 feet over the valley. A place called Seneca Rocks. They set about creating a wilderness assault training school. For more than a year, soldiers clambered over this impressive formation, practicing how to muffle the sounds of their hammers and to work as a team to master the rock face while communicating only with hand signals. Some of the men would use skills learned here to scale the cliffs at Normandy on D-Day. Many of the steel pitons the soldiers hammered into the walls of Seneca Rocks are still here today, but to spot them can require climbing some of the toughest routes in the East. Thousands flock here every year to slowly ratchet themselves up to the summit. But at least 15 climbers have perished on these peaks over the last 40 years. Those who make it to the top embody one of West Virginia's state mottos: mountaineers are always free. Seneca Rocks was named after the Senecas, a Native American tribe that used this area as their hunting ground before European settlers started pushing them off their land. West Virginia's rugged landscape makes it stand out from its neighbors. It's here where the Allegheny, Blue Ridge, and Appalachian Mountains all converge and give West Virginia the highest average elevation of any state east of the Mississippi. And that can make for some pretty unique communities. At first, the tiny town of Greenbank, population 143, may look like many West Virginia towns. One main road, a few houses, and lots of trees. But there's something else going on here that's impossible to see. When these students at Greenbank Elementary Middle School go home, they won't be allowed to surf the internet on a Wi-Fi connection or text their friends. That's because this 21st century technology is strictly limited here, thanks to a futuristic facility that towers over the town. The Robert C. Byrd Greenbank Telescope. It's as long as a football field and even though it weighs 17 million pounds, can pivot on command, which makes it the largest fully steerable telescope in the world. It's part of the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, a collection of giant telescopes that help create images of outer space by using faint radio waves from distant galaxies. Radio waves that are helping researchers to unlock the mystery of how stars and the universe were formed. This site was chosen for the observatory because the surrounding Allegheny Mountains act like shields to keep earthbound radio signals from television antennas and radio towers from interfering with the researchers' work. But even West Virginia's rugged mountains can't stop all modern technological signals. That's why the Federal Communications Commission has created a radio-free zone for 13,000 square miles around Green Bank, a zone the size of Massachusetts and Connecticut combined. Today, astronomers may come to these mountains to explore outer space, but in the 1700s, it was European settlers who flocked here to explore West Virginia itself. But as these white pioneers paddled their way through this mountainous new land, they came into conflict with the Native American tribes that had lived here for centuries and wanted to protect their hunting grounds. Those conflicts would ultimately end in war and lead to one infamous murder that spawned a famous West Virginia legend. It all started on what's now the state's border with Ohio, at a site called Point Pleasant, where the Ohio and Kanawha rivers converge. Long before wagon trains were crossing the Great Plains to the American West, this was the wild frontier, where white settlers clashed with tribes like the Shawnee. Violence soon followed. Atrocities were carried out by both sides, including kidnappings and killings. By 1773, hostilities had reached a fever pitch. The next year, the governor of Virginia, Lord Dunmore, sent 2 armies with a total of 2,500 soldiers to subdue the Shawnee and other native tribes. When one of those armies arrived here at Point Pleasant, it was ambushed by 1,200 Shawnee warriors, led by their chief named Cornstalk. But he and his men suffered heavy losses and retreated across the river to what's now Ohio. Soon after, the Shawnee were forced to relinquish their claim to all of their land south of the Ohio River. Today, an obelisk stands on the site of the famous Battle of Point Pleasant and marks not only one army's victory, but also how that battle cost the Shawnee hundreds of square miles of land that were then opened up for settlement. But despite his tribe's great loss, the story of Chief Cornstalk wasn't over quite yet. 3 years later, the chief returned, seeking to forge peaceful ties with the settlers. In 1777, he arrived at nearby Fort Randolph to warn the American soldiers in the fort that some members of the Shawnee had taken sides with the British and could pose a threat. What happened next is reenacted here in Point Pleasant each May, in a reconstruction of the original fort. As the reenactment begins, the chief, dressed in red, arrives to deliver his news. But his reception isn't what he expects. Inside, he's taken hostage. Later, outside, a Virginia soldier is killed while hunting. An angry local mob seeking revenge rushes into the fort and enters the building where Chief Cornstalk is being held. Anyone nearby at the time would have had no doubts about what happened next. The Shawnee chief's peaceful mission ends with his own murder at the hands of the settlers he had come to protect. 1 year later, in May 1778, hundreds of Shawnee and other Native American warriors seeking to avenge the chief's murder lay siege to the fort, starting with an all-out assault. Some of these reenactors are descendants of the original settlers and Native Americans who fought in the siege. The battle lasted less than a week and the American soldiers were able to repel the attack. But in the end, many believe that Chief Cornstalk had the last word from his grave. The story goes that as the great Shawnee chief lay dying, he placed a curse on the area. A curse that some believe led to a series of mysterious events and deaths. Beginning in the 1960s, residents around Point Pleasant, West Virginia, claimed they had seen a winged monster, an oversized humanoid with giant wings and red, fiery eyes that they called the Mothman, and which went on to become the inspiration for a 2002 film starring Richard Gere called The Mothman Prophecies. The film is based on events in 1967, when, just days before Christmas, a bridge over the Ohio River collapsed at rush hour, sending 37 vehicles into the water below and killing 46 people. Investigators concluded that a cracked eye bar caused the bridge to fail. But at the time, some locals believed the curse of Chief Cornstalk was to blame. Long before supposed sightings of the mysterious Mothman, Native American tribes like the Shawnee inhabited what's now West Virginia for hundreds of years. But this state holds evidence of even earlier inhabitants too, like this giant mound of earth in a town called Moundsville. Around 200 BC, a people known as the Adena were living here, in the Kanawha River Valley. To create a burial mound, they piled up 60,000 tons of earth, basket load by basket load, over a period of 100 years. Today, this landmark is known as the Grave Creek Mound. It's the largest remaining burial mound of the Adena. Inside, archaeologists discovered burial chambers, copper jewelry, shell beads, and even skeletons. Researchers still don't know why the Adena built a mound this big here in West Virginia. But there are some people right here in Moundsville who've had plenty of time to try and solve that mystery. That's because many of the windows in the cell blocks of West Virginia's infamous state penitentiary look right out on the Grave Creek Mound, and once offered convicts a perfect vantage point to contemplate the lives of these ancient Americans. But doing time in West Virginia hasn't always meant being locked up in tiny cells with hardened criminals, especially if you're America's homemaking queen. In 2004, white-collar convict Martha Stewart served 5 months here at the Alderson Federal Prison Camp. First opened in 1927, Alderson was the first federal prison built exclusively for women. After Stewart started serving her time here, the media nicknamed this minimum security facility Camp Cupcake. Forbes magazine called it one of America's 10 cushiest prisons. With brick buildings and green open space, it looks more like a college than a prison. Stewart described her stay here as horrifying, but said she coped by imagining herself at Yale University. Those who come to stay at Alderson Federal Prison Camp pretty much know what they're in for. But not far away lies a West Virginia landmark that managed to hide a very deep U.S. government secret from its guests for almost half a century. Here in White Sulphur Springs, the Greenbrier Resort is one of West Virginia's most historic buildings. Founded in 1778, its high-profile guest list has spanned the history of the nation, from Andrew Jackson to Jessica Simpson. But until the early 90s, very few of those who checked in here knew of the secret that lay below them. It was only discovered by the Washington Post in 1992, when it reported that the U.S. government had built an enormous bunker under Greenbrier, starting in the 1950s, to shelter the U.S. Congress and the President in the event of a nuclear attack on Washington. It was a top-secret facility called Project Greek Island, a vast 112,000 square foot facility, protected behind 20-ton steel blast doors. Entrances to the bunker can still be spotted today from the air. Inside, Visitors can now get a tour of the facility that once held decontamination chambers, a television studio, dormitories, and meeting rooms where the House, Senate, and President could continue to run the country in the event of war. The resort was originally built here because of the area's healing sulfur springs that fed the nearby Greenbrier River. Just part of the nearly 40,000 miles of rivers and streams that flow through this Appalachian state. It was one of these waterways that inspired a famous American song, made its singer a star, and became a much-loved West Virginia anthem. Singer John Denver may be best known for his Rocky Mountain High, but it was a song about West Virginia that first brought him fame. The 1971 hit single, Take Me Home, Country Roads. A song that celebrates the beauty of this Appalachian state in its opening lines. Almost heaven, West Virginia, Blue Ridge Mountains, Shenandoah River. Take Me Home reached #2 on the Billboard charts and has been practically a state anthem ever since. But while Take Me Home caused many to think of the Shenandoah as a West Virginia river, only a small piece of this waterway actually flows through the state. And it's not the first river that comes to mind for most West Virginians. That honor likely belongs to the New River, which cuts a path right through the Appalachian Mountains. Today, it's the heart of the New River Gorge National River, part of the National Park Service, and one of West Virginia's natural treasures. 70,000 acres of protected wilderness that hug this winding waterway as it flows north through the center of the state. The New River may have been new to the pioneers who named it, but geologically, it's believed to be among the oldest rivers on Earth. Today, the rocky cliffs that the New River sliced through millions of years ago tower over this waterway, offering views that draw more than 1 million people each year. In the 18th century, the waters of the New River and its northern neighbor, the Gauley, were considered too treacherous to navigate, which is why early settlers walked along the river's banks. Today, thrill seekers ride their rapids just for fun. This section of the Gauley is considered a rafter's paradise. It's home to the Big Five. 5 Class 5 rapids that offer terrifying but thrilling rides. The deep canyons and swift-flowing waters of the Gauley and New Rivers have always made it hard going for travelers heading west. First, for those crossing the area on foot, and later, for others in horse-drawn carriages, and even cars. But that all changed in 1977, thanks to this West Virginia landmark, the New River Gorge Bridge. When construction began, its designers promised they would deliver an engineering marvel. They knew that stretching a 1,700-foot-long arch high over this gorge was going to be anything but easy. Engineers first had to string cables between towers on each side of the river. Then, trolleys running on the cables ferried in sections of the bridge piece by piece. Holding it all up was a single giant steel arch, an arch that relied on the walls of the gorge itself for its strength. It took 3 years to build, and when it was finally finished, West Virginia got the engineering marvel it had been promised, and a record that it holds to this day. The New River Gorge Bridge remains the longest single-arch steel bridge in North America. The New River may be part of the National Park Service today, but once it was the gritty industrial heart of West Virginia, thanks in part to one boom town that stood here on the New River's banks. This is Thurmond, West Virginia. Population 5. But it wasn't always like this. Thanks to rich deposits of coal in the area's mines, Thurmond's banks were once full of cash. Coal barons walked its streets, and hotels here were booked solid, as scrappy miners and businessmen arrived to cash in on the new boom in coal. And that also made Thurmond as rough a town as any in the Wild West. At the time, it was said that the only difference between Thurmond and hell is that a river runs through Thurmond. In those days, the only way to get here was by train. And it was a town without streets. Its buildings downtown faced right out onto the train tracks, just as they still do today. Freight trains still ride these rails and provide images of what Thurmond might have looked like more than a century ago. In an age when railway lines were the engineering marvels of the day, especially here in the mountains of West Virginia. Building paths for train tracks through these hills required tough machines and even tougher men, one of whom has become a West Virginia legend. When the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad started laying down a new rail line through West Virginia in the 1870s to carry out Appalachian coal, the new tracks ran right into Big Bend Mountain. 800 men were soon deep inside, chiseling their way through more than a mile of rock and inhaling tiny particles from clouds of dust that would end up killing many of them. To speed up the work, the C&O reportedly brought a new machine called a steam-powered drill into the tunnel. A machine that's tied to one of West Virginia's great folk tales, the legend of the steel-driving man, John Henry. The story goes that Henry, an African-American hammerman, claimed that he alone could break rock faster than the C&O's new drill. Pitting himself against this then new technology, Henry hammered his way through the mountain and succeeded in beating the drill, but collapsed and died almost as soon as he was finished. No one even knows if John Henry actually existed, but he lives on as a West Virginia folk hero, and one that country singer Johnny Cash famously sang about in his much-loved version of The Legend of John Henry's Hammer. John Henry said to his captain, "A man ain't nothing but a man," Cash sang. "But if you bring that steam drill round, I'll beat it fair and honest. I'll die with my hammer in my hand." Today, the railroad is still the heart of West Virginia's economy. Trains still crisscross this state, hauling coal just as they have for more than a century. But these days, another source of energy is transforming the land, just like the railways once did. But this time, it's crossing over, not through the mountains. Building a new natural gas pipeline across a mountain estate like West Virginia is a giant logistical challenge. Pipeline companies have to negotiate deals with landowners, cut down trees, dig trench, lay in miles of pipe, piece by piece, and then cover it all up again and make it look as if nothing is there. Laying new pipeline can cost hundreds of millions of dollars, but it's an investment that pays off. That's because West Virginia sits atop one of the largest natural gas deposits in the world, the Marcellus Shale Formation that runs for nearly 600 miles under New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and nearly all of West Virginia. After energy companies dig test wells and locate concentrations of gas, they build drilling pads like this one, and then pump water, sand, and chemicals into the earth with enough force to crack open the shale deep below and release the natural gas, which is then sucked out into the pipeline. It's a controversial process known as hydraulic fracturing, or fracking. Environmentalists claim that fracking chemicals pollute the groundwater and are harming nearby rivers and streams, but energy companies refute the claims. And meanwhile, the drilling continues. Over the last 10 years, hundreds of these shale wells have sprung up across West Virginia. And natural gas drilling has made many landowners here rich, even ones that already have a palace of gold. This is not your typical West Virginia mountaintop. It's a place that's been called America's Taj Mahal, a permanent home for a group of spiritual devotees that many of us think of as wanderers. This is New Vrindavan, named after a holy city in India, and the home of the largest Hare Krishna community in America. When they're not standing on street corners singing in saffron robes, some followers of this religious group come here to New Vrindavan. It was completed in 1979 as a shrine to the late founder of the Hare Krishna movement, a man called Srila Prabhupada. Unpaid devotees built this palace on top of an old garbage dump and claim they developed their building skills by using their Krishna consciousness. Its dome is covered with 22-karat gold leaf. Inside, its floors and walls are made of dozens of different kinds of marble from 17 countries. But controversy plagued New Vrindavan from the start. In the 1990s, its leader, a New York State native who went by the name of Swami Bhaktapad, was sentenced to 12 years in jail for racketeering. Charges that centered around his selling of fake souvenirs of Snoopy and other cartoon characters, and accusations that he engaged his followers to murder 2 other Hare Krishna devotees. But these days, this Hare Krishna community is striking it rich from a boom that lies right under their dancing feet. New Vrindavan sold the natural gas rights to its 4,000 acres for $10 million. Money, it says, will go to refurbishing its Palace of Gold. West Virginia may not be well known for this hilltop palace, but it is often remembered for the cascading waters of its Blackwater Falls, the jagged peaks of its Seneca Rocks, and for the hundreds of hills and hollows that are home to most West Virginians today. But 150 years ago, these iconic landmarks and the people that lived here were still part of the Commonwealth of Virginia. West Virginia was not yet a separate state. When it comes to the story of why and how the people of this mountainous region broke away to create their own independent state, there's no greater catalyst than the Civil War. A war that many say almost got its start right here in West Virginia, on the state's northeast border with Maryland. In 1794, President George Washington chose Harper's Ferry as the site for a new armory that would also manufacture arms and munitions for the U.S. Army. He knew that the Shenandoah River's currents could power the mills necessary to make weapons. The remains of those mills still line the river just below this historic town. But as the Civil War edged closer in the mid-1800s, Harper's Ferry proved that it might not be the safest place for a U.S. armory. And the first threat didn't come from Confederate troops. It came as a surprise ambush from a now legendary abolitionist, a man some say was America's very first terrorist. On the night of October 16, 1859, a white man named John Brown and 18 of his anti-slavery supporters approached Harper's Ferry from Maryland to the northeast and captured the town's bridges. Their mission was to launch an assault on the U.S. Armory, steal a cache of weapons, and use them to arm runaway slaves so they could launch their own attacks on slave owners and foment a rebellion. When Brown and his men arrived in Harper's Ferry, they were all armed and ready to die for their abolitionist cause. They quickly stormed the armory and started taking hostages. But almost immediately, the plan started to go terribly wrong. A passenger train happened to pull into Harper's Ferry, and Brown's men stopped it, but then decided to allow it to continue on. When the train later arrived in Baltimore, passengers alerted authorities that Harper's Ferry was under attack. By then, Brown had moved his hostages here to this brick building, the Armory's fire engine house. The next morning, as the sun rose over Harper's Ferry, townspeople and local militia began firing on Brown's men. 4 of them tried to escape by swimming across the rivers, but they were shot dead in the water. And the worst was yet to come. About 24 hours after the siege began, 90 U.S. Marines arrived from Washington by train. Under the command of Colonel Robert E. Lee, the Marines stormed the engine house, freed the hostages, and captured Brown and his men. When it was over, John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry cost 17 lives, including 10 of Brown's men, several townspeople, and the mayor of Harper's Ferry. John Brown was convicted of treason and sentenced to death. But his anti-slavery speeches during the trial inspired many across the country to sympathize with the abolitionist cause, which helped spur the nation closer to civil war. After the war broke out, battles were fought right here in West Virginia's streets, and the town of Lewisburg soon became a flashpoint. Today, reenactors depict a battle that happened here 150 years ago on May 23, 1862. At the time, Lewisburg was under Northern control when Confederate forces arrived, armed with artillery, and began firing on a nearby Union camp. The battle that followed pitted 2,200 Confederate troops against a much smaller Union force of 1,600. But despite the odds, the Union soldiers succeeded in capturing the Confederate artillery. Historians estimate that up to 80 Confederate soldiers died in the battle, which lasted just an hour. The victorious Union side lost 13 men. Many in Northwest Virginia remained divided over the war, but by 1861, it was clear that most preferred independence from the rest of Virginia. And if West Virginia has a birthplace, it's here, in the northern city of Wheeling, right on the Ohio border. The building in which political leaders drafted West Virginia's new Constitution still stands downtown. At the time, it was called the Wheeling Custom House, but today, it's known as Independence Hall. Over the next 2 years, delegates from counties across Northwest Virginia met here to hammer out the boundaries for a new state and a constitution that would include the gradual emancipation of slaves. By March 1863, residents overwhelmingly voted in favor of the state's new constitution. In April, President Abraham Lincoln declared that West Virginia statehood had been approved. And finally, on June 20th, 1863, a newly elected governor named Arthur I. Borman proudly stood before the county delegates and announced the birth of America's 35th state. The new state's border was determined by the counties that had voted to be free. Years in the making, West Virginia had become the only state in the nation to be carved out of another by popular vote. Wheeling, the West Virginia state capital, thrived after the war. Iron and steel mills sprang up along its riverbanks, turning out a product that was much needed by those rebuilding after the war: nails. In fact, Wheeling's factories turned out so many nails, it was called the nail capital of the world. By the turn of the century, Wheeling had become the richest city per capita in America. Chances are many here celebrated their good fortunes by lighting up cigars. That's because the city was home to America's oldest cigar manufacturer, the Marsh Wheeling Company, which dates back to 1840, when it began making special cigars called stogies, which are longer and thinner than regular cigars. Stogies were the preferred cigars of covered wagon drivers in the 19th century, wagons called Conestogas, which is where stogies got their name. In 1870, Wheeling lost its title as the state capital when legislators voted to relocate to a much smaller town in the south called Charleston, whose population at the time was just 3,000. Today, it's the state's biggest city, home to 50,000 people, and West Virginia's beautiful state house. But Charleston hasn't always had an easy ride. Between 1807 and 1885, the capital was moved back and forth between Wheeling and Charleston 3 times, thanks to political tensions that continue to simmer after the Civil War. As the sun sets, the new capital's gold dome sparkles on Charleston's skyline, thanks to its 23.5-carat gold leaf. But West Virginia's story has little to do with gold and a lot to do with an ancient black rock that powers not just West Virginia, but much of America, and has caused hundreds of mountains to disappear. When the lights come on in Charleston, West Virginia, it's a good bet that their bulbs are powered by West Virginia coal. Just as houses, factories, airports, and state capitals are all across the country. Americans still get almost 50% of their energy from coal. And a lot of that coal comes from West Virginia, which has the second biggest coal reserves in the U.S., thanks to some pretty fascinating ancient geological history. hundreds of millions of years ago, the land that's now West Virginia was actually located near the equator and covered by tropical rainforests, plants that decayed and became bogs of carbon-rich peat. Over time, that plant material was compressed by sand and clay and transformed into coal. By the time the North American continent had been formed, the land that would become West Virginia was lined with deep veins of this carbon-rich fossil fuel. Fuel that people have been digging out of the ground here for hundreds of years. In fact, West Virginia has so much coal that there's now active mining in 43 of its 55 counties. The coal industry is also the state's biggest employer, providing more than 22,000 jobs that offer salaries of about $70,000 a year, more than 3 times the average income in the state. Thousands of miners across West Virginia have been mining these hills for generations. But many argue that the story of West Virginia coal isn't as clean as many coal companies would like them to believe. Most big mining companies ship the coal dug by West Virginia miners and the profits out of the state. Miners have been fighting for a fair shake ever since they first descended into the mines. That's because it can be a deadly job. Since 1883, 21,000 miners have died while working in the mines, and even more from black lung, a slow disease brought on by tiny coal particles that lodge in their lungs. Others from disasters that struck without warning, sometimes on an unimaginable scale. That's what happened in one West Virginia town just over a century ago. This is the town of Monongah. It lies in a coal-rich valley just south of the Pennsylvania border, on the West Fork River. It's also the site of the worst mining disaster in U.S. history. Today, there's just one active coal mine outside Monongah, but just over a century ago, mines surrounded this town, worked by more than 1,000 men, many who'd come from Europe with the promise of steady work and good pay. But that promise was shattered mid-morning on December 6, 1907, when an explosion tore through 2 mines at the base of town. The blast was so powerful that streetcars were knocked off their rails, and houses were blown right across the West Fork River. By the time the smoke cleared on that cold December day, 362 miners had lost their lives, leaving more than 1,000 mothers, wives, and children without husbands, fathers, and sons. And by the following summer, Monongah was still grieving for its loss. During a church service in nearby Fairmont, the idea of holding an annual day to remember Monongah's lost fathers was born. This black and white marker commemorates America's very first Father's Day, 64 years before President Richard Nixon made it an officially recognized holiday in 1972. For much of the 20th century, most coal in West Virginia was mined by men working deep underground. But by the 1970s, a new kind of mining was starting to transform West Virginia on a scale that can still be hard to comprehend unless you see it from the air. At first, coal-rich Mingo County looks like many other forested areas of the Appalachians. But when the fog clears, you'll soon discover that many of the mountains themselves are gone. This is the land of mountaintop removal, a mining technique so powerful and efficient that companies can simply carve off the tops of entire mountains to get to the coal buried below. This is one of the biggest mountaintop mines in West Virginia. It's called Hobet 21. Not long ago, this area was blanketed with trees and hills. Now, it's a 12,000-acre dig site. It can take just a few men and a few monster machines to destroy an entire Appalachian mountain. Once the trees are clear-cut, geologists locate the seams of coal below. Then, the company drills holes, stuffs them with powerful explosive, and blows them up to loosen earth and rock. Next, excavators move in to rip the mountain apart, scoop by scoop. Hobet 21 is home to one of the most famous mining machines in America, an infamous dragline excavator called Big John. It's as tall as a 20-story building and can claw out 100 tons of earth in a single pass, all with just one worker at the controls. Big John has been ripping apart West Virginia's hills since 1983, and it's still going strong. But even Big John isn't big enough to do the job alone. All across this mine, men and machines are busy at work. For every ton of coal produced in a mine like this one, the company has to remove 16 tons of earth. The best way to grasp the scale of this operation is to watch it from the air. It looks like a giant sandbox with enormous motorized toys. The state of West Virginia has issued hundreds of permits for mountaintop removal mining, but there are some restrictions. Here, mine operators could remove all the earth around this mountain, but they were required to leave the mountain top intact. That's because a Civil War cemetery stands on its peak. It's one of the oddest sights in the state, an historic landmark left standing high in a tuft of trees, while everything around it below has been completely destroyed. All this activity has one singular purpose: to uncover valuable seams of coal like this one, and then dig it out and ship it to market. Surface mining is much safer for West Virginia's miners, since they don't have to work underground in potentially dangerous tunnels. But it comes with a huge environmental cost. 500 mountains have already disappeared, along with the habitats for hundreds of species. And lives are impacted too. When a mining company carves off a mountaintop, it has to put that earth somewhere, and so it dumps it into nearby valleys. 3,200 local streams have been destroyed, and entire communities have been forced to relocate when the mining companies buy up the land. But not everyone in West Virginia has been willing to sell. And it took just one man to bring one of West Virginia's biggest mountaintop mines to a grinding halt. It happened here in Pigeon Roost Hollow, and is why this house is still standing. It's the home of Jimmy Weekly, a retired miner who battled the coal companies here for years, refusing to sell his piece of the valley so a company could turn it into a dump site. Land that's been in Weekly's family since the 1700s. Almost all of Weekly's neighbors here in this hollow sold out, and the mining company finally raised Weekly's offer to $2 million, but he still turned them down. A refusal that triggered a series of lawsuits and brought the company's operations to a halt. Weekly once claimed he'd stay in this house until he dies, which is why he was once called the last man on the mountain. Jimmy Weekly's story is evidence of the complicated relationships that West Virginians have with the coal that lies beneath their feet, around their houses, and all across their communities. It's provided jobs for generations, but has also forced many to suffer from black lung, pollution, and operations that have destroyed entire mountains and valleys. But whatever damage coal mining has done, it hasn't put an end to West Virginians' love of their state and the communities they're proud to call home. Communities like Fairmont. It was here that Olympic gymnast Mary Lou Retton was born in 1968, the granddaughter of a coal miner. Retton left West Virginia in 1982 to train in Texas, and chose not to return after vaulting her way to gold in the 1984 Olympic Games, settling down in Houston instead. But in 2009, Mary Lou decided it was time to come back home and moved her family back to Fairmont. "I just love the simplicity of West Virginia life," Retton said. And Mary Lou Retton isn't the first to feel that way about West Virginia. A place where towering peaks beckon hardy mountaineers. And a fiercely independent spirit, forged during a time of war, is still alive on its streets today. And all across the state, from the tops of its hills to the bottoms of its hollows, and on every river in between.